At the margin, I do think Cummings's departure will facilitate an agreement. He was a key proponent of a hard line against the EU, has been pushing for massive flexibility on the question of state aid and the government not signing up to level playing field commitments with the EU. So I think his departure at the margin does increase a bit more flexibility. On the EU side, they're questioning and curious about what impact that will now have on the dynamic in the negotiations. I think it's too early to tell, but he was a key voice around the Prime Minister who was advocating a hard line. And in his absence, I think those such as Rishi Sunak, such as Michael Gove, that are a bit more constructive and pro-deal are likely to gain a bit more influence in the endgame. And I think that's important.
Mujtaba, how likely are we, do you think, to actually get a breakthrough, if not this week, then before the end of the month? And how much of that is just going to be a function of the UK making further concessions rather than the EU giving UK a little bit of mile?
Well, it takes two to tango, right? There are two sides in the negotiation and both are going to have to give a little. I don't think there'll be a deal this week. I've been speaking to negotiators on both sides over the weekend, and I suspect what we'll likely see instead is more progress. A European Council on Thursday with leaders that may take stock of the negotiations but won't spend any meaningful time discussing it. Probably more Boris Johnson and von der Leyen interventions and phone calls, and then a final stretch towards the very end of the month with a political deal emerging just shy of the end of November. And then the European Parliament needs to ratify and look at the deal. There are 2 or 3 committees that need to scrutinise the detail, vote the thing through, and then there'll be a plenary session either mid-December or in the last week of December to finally provide the EP's consent and ratify the deal.
Mujtaba, good morning. Great to have you on the program. Looking at the headlines, the key sticking points at this point are the fishing rights in British waters, the level playing field, as you discussed, conditions for business and enforcement programs. And both sides appear to be pretty adamant that they're attached to their respective positions. What could actually unlock a compromise?
Look, I think the question for Boris is what can he sell domestically? That's the prism through which he will look at the deal. I think on state aid, the win is already clear. The government will be able to argue it's a new UK regime enforced by a UK authority, or overseen rather by a UK authority enforced by UK courts, so that the government has now taken back control on the question of state aid. The problem, I think, for Boris is the right of the party doesn't really understand or care about state aid so much. They do care about fish, and that's where the government needs to make real inroads. And I think in particular achieve an increase in the quota and the access for Scottish fishermen. That's super important for Johnson in the context of Scottish elections next year. So the EU has to move on fish. If the EU side does that, I suspect the government will move on the level playing field. There'll be a political trade-off between the two, and the deal will be done at the end of the month. And that's what I suspect will happen over the course of the next few weeks.
Mujtaba, how would you characterize the European position and the European member states in terms of their unity at this stage? That was a real defining characteristics of their approach thus far, the fact that they remain so united. Does that unity still exist within Europe?
It does. I think they're all united behind Barnier, who they all believe has done an excellent job, and Barnier has indeed delivered a very good and beneficial divorce deal, and I suspect on the future relationship he'll achieve the same thing. So I think they are united. One big question they're thinking about now on the EU side is whether or not a deal can come into force without the involvement of the European Parliament. In the event that time is very, very constrained, is it possible for the member states to provisionally apply an agreement without EP ratification? I think there's a lot of concern about going down that route precisely because the union has been united. They want to keep the process and all the bits and bobs together at the very end as well. So I do think the EP will need to provide its input into the process, and that's why I think you need the agreement to come together by the end of the month. But, you know, the EU side is united. The French recognise they have to compromise. Germany in the background has been doing some work with the UK. Barnier is nominally in the lead. Von der Leyen has been doing a lot with Boris Johnson as well in the calls that they've been having. So I think all the parts are working well together, and I suspect we'll land a deal at the end of the month.